When you hear the word cannibal, what comes to mind? Probably sensationalized stories of savage tribes, driven by a gruesome hunger. But what if I told you the reality is far more complex, and in some cases, surprisingly spiritual? Today, we're diving deep into the history of cannibalism, but not to shock you. Instead, we're going to explore the curiosities behind these practices, to understand the diverse, and often misunderstood, motivations that led people down this path. From rituals of love and mourning to symbolic acts of war, the real stories challenge everything we think we know. Let's start our journey in Papua New Guinea with the Fore people. For them, consuming parts of their deceased relatives wasn't an act of violence. It was an act of profound love and respect. The Fore believed that the human body held different essences, and for a soul to peacefully enter the spirit world, these essences had to be properly released. So, family members, primarily women and children, would consume parts of their loved ones. This wasn't about hunger, it was a final, intimate gesture of care, a way to guide the soul on its journey and keep their essence within the community. It was their way of mourning, a ritual that connected the living with the dead in the most direct way imaginable. This practice, known as endocannibalism, largely stopped by the mid-20th century, but it leaves us with a powerful question. Can an act we find horrifying actually be an expression of love? Now, let's travel to Western Brazil, to the Wari people. Their funeral customs were just as perplexing to outsiders. When missionaries first encountered the Wari, they were shocked by their practices. But for the Wari, the idea of burying a loved one in the cold, dark earth was far more disturbing and disrespectful than consuming them. They saw burial as abandoning their family member to rot alone. Instead, they practiced compassionate cannibalism. By consuming the body, they believed they were helping to diminish the family's grief, absorbing the sorrow, and maintaining a deep, lasting connection to the person they lost. This wasn't a ritual for just anyone. It was reserved for their closest kin. Enemies were treated differently. This stark contrast shows just how much culture shapes our ideas of respect, death, and how we remember those we love. But not all cannibalism was born from compassion. On the other side of the spectrum, we have war cannibalism, famously practiced in Fiji, which was once known as the Cannibal Isles. Here, consuming a defeated enemy was not about nutrition. It was a highly symbolic act. Fijian warriors believed in a spiritual life force called mana, a combination of strength, prestige, and power. By consuming parts of a formidable enemy, they believed they could absorb that enemy's mana, taking their courage and strength for themselves. These weren't chaotic, violent feasts. They were highly structured ceremonies, often led by powerful chiefs and bound by strict rules and protocols. It was a ritualized way to assert dominance, display power, and spiritually weaken their rivals. Interestingly, when Christianity arrived in the 19th century, many chiefs abandoned the practice almost overnight. This rapid change proves that it was a deeply embedded cultural practice, not an inherent or uncontrollable savagery. Let's shift our focus to Africa, where the story takes another surprising turn. Here, the line between fact and fiction becomes incredibly blurred. In some regions, cannibalism wasn't a widespread reality, but a powerful myth, often amplified for political reasons. European colonial riders and rival tribes would spread terrifying tales of cannibal kings and bloodthirsty societies. In Central Africa, why? It served a purpose. For colonial powers, these stories justified conquest and painted local populations as uncivilized and in need of saving. For rival tribes, it was a form of psychological warfare, a way to demonize their enemies. Modern historians now argue that many of the so-called cannibal tribes of Africa may have never practiced it at all. The myth was more powerful and enduring than the truth. This makes us question how much of history has been shaped by propaganda and who gets to tell the story. But in the Amazon, the ancient Tupinamba people did practice a very real and very unique form of ritual cannibalism. Their approach was tied to a cosmic cycle of revenge and balance. When they captured an enemy warrior, he wasn't immediately killed. Instead, he was often incorporated into the tribe for months, or even years. He would be given a new name, a wife, and treated almost like a member of the community. This period was a long elaborate ceremony. But eventually, the captive would be ritually executed and consumed. For the Tupinamba, this wasn't an act of simple cruelty. It was a spiritual necessity. It was about avenging their own fallen warriors from past conflicts and restoring a sense of cosmic equilibrium. It was a worldview where enemies and kin were tangled together in a complex web of conflict, honor, and spiritual duty. So, with all these varied and complex traditions, what made them disappear? It wasn't always a dramatic story of forced conversion or violent suppression. In Manicases, tribes abandoned these practices voluntarily. As trade routes expanded and new belief systems were introduced, cultures began to change from within. Missionaries, travelers, and neighboring communities introduced alternative rituals for honoring the dead or resolving conflicts. These new ideas offered different ways to meet the same fundamental human needs: to grieve, to show respect, to find meaning. This shows us that cultural change can happen through dialogue and exchange, not just through force. Today, these rituals have almost entirely vanished, surviving only in oral histories and anthropological texts. But their stories continue to fascinate us, because they push the boundaries of what we consider human. They challenge our modern assumptions about morality, survival, and spirituality. By looking at these practices with curiosity instead of judgment, we don't just see brutality, we see the incredible, sometimes unsettling, diversity of human culture. We discover that behind even the most alien customs often lie universal human needs. The need to honor loved ones, to make sense of the afterlife, to protect a community, and to grapple with the profound mysteries of life and death. The world is far more complex and strange than we can imagine, and understanding its past helps us better understand ourselves. Thanks for joining me on this journey into a misunderstood corner of human history. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the complexities of our world. See you next time.